Welcome to Stokastic NFL Live Before Lock. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. I'm joined once again by the preseason pioneer, Matt Gajewski. You can find him on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. That's Gajewski. And this show is sponsored by PrizePicks, which offers daily prop-based contests. While you're coming in, please give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much more. Once you subscribe, hit that notification button to get alerts when our shows go live. Be sure to also check out today's free premium tools and data, which are MLB Top Stacks. But there's more. If you want to try out all of our tools for MLB DFS, you now can. We have set all of our tools and projections for night slates 100% free. So this is a great way to test out what we have to offer if you're on the fence about subscribing. We also have our special Live Before Lock offer available with BetMGM to get up to a $1,000 risk-free bet with your first deposit. Just click the link in the video description below to claim your $1,000 risk-free bet now. And if you don't have $1,000 to bet, whatever you want to put in, they will match it. It can be $50, can be $20, I think it can be $10. I don't know what the low is, but put in what you're comfortable with and they will match it. Great deal there. All right, Matt, today we continue with our progression from showdown to a 2-game slate to a 4 and 5 game slate last night to now we have 2 decent sized slates in one day. Pretty fun. First a 3-game slate in the morning, then a 5-game slate later tonight. It's the same slate for both DraftKings and FanDuel, so that's helpful, and salaries don't matter. So it's the discussion is the exact same pretty much. So we'll go position by position for each slate. But first, any general thoughts you want to share about today's slate?
Yeah, I kind of like the 2 separate slates. I mean, I just like playing a lot of different slates. So I usually play like all the showdowns. So I don't mind it. I know some people were a little disappointed we didn't get a full 8-gamer, but I think we have 2 different puzzles to solve. The night slate is going to be really wild to talk about. There's he's not mispriced. His position's wrong. And we'll get into that in the unique situation it presents.
That's fun. Yeah, I'm on the same page. I mean, it's a 3-game slate and a 5-game slate, but when you really think about it, the way that preseason seems to be broken down, it's like we have each game is like 3 games within itself because nobody plays more than a half. So it'll be interesting. There'll be plenty of ways to get unique anyway. It'll be fun. All right, are you ready to talk about some early slate quarterbacks?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the early slate, we got the Chiefs, Bears, Panthers, Commanders, Colts, and Bills. Right off the top, who are your favorite quarterbacks from this slate?
The early slate's not great for quarterbacks. There's one team that's going to be suiting up 2 guys. It's the Bills. Josh Allen's not going to play. So you're going to see some combination of Case Keenum and Matt Barkley. I wouldn't be surprised if they just split this right down the middle. But I think Case Keenum's pretty farther ahead of Barkley in terms of the backup quarterback race. So there's a chance you see Barkley for even more than a half. I think he stands out as the top play. He's played fairly well in previous preseasons. He nearly threw for 300 yards last preseason, had a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. He's more of a pocket passer, but he's at least competent out there. He'll be throwing to some decent weapons too. We'll talk about the receivers later, but they have a lot invested in the receiver position, even outside of the guys you know and love, like Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. There's guys lower on the roster like Khalil Shakir and Jake Kumerow who are actually pretty talented. So I think right away, Barkley and Keenum need to be the 2 guys you look at, with Keenum being slightly behind Barkley.
So you have a slight preference for Barkley when it comes to the Bills quarterbacks?
Yeah, it's a coaching staff philosophy. Buffalo is not going to play a lot of their premier guys. And it looks like Barkley's not really in this job running for the backup quarterback job. So if they decide they want to even save Keenum, maybe Barkley plays more than a half, but it's pretty close for me. I'll be playing both of them.
Okay, makes sense. And then after that, who do you like after the Buffalo quarterback? So they're the clear tier 1. It looks like, just looking at the projections, they project much better than tier 2. But who are you playing outside of the Buffalo quarterbacks?
Yeah, and after that, it gets pretty gross. Carolina is going to have 4 players today. Washington's going to have 3, depending on how long Wentz plays. He could play just a little bit. And then Kansas City, every single year, Andy Reid says all the starters are going to play the first quarter, and then they don't. Last year, for reference, he said the exact same thing, and Pat Mahomes played 4 snaps. So they're really dealing with 3 there, but still, that's not great. Chicago is going to have 3. Fields is going to play a little bit. Indianapolis is going to have 3 or 4, depending on the status of Matt Ryan, which isn't exactly clear. So it's not great behind the Buffalo signal callers. If we're going to pick a couple of these guys, I think you want to look to some of the more mobile options. On Washington, Sam Howell stands out as a mobile player. He was a guy that rushed for a lot of yards in college with North Carolina last year, over 800, and he was a 5th-round draft pick. So he's actually kind of in the running potentially to be the backup if he can beat out Heineke. Definitely needs a solid preseason, but I think he's right there. And then on Indianapolis, if Matt Ryan doesn't get a lot of time, Sam Ehlinger kind of fills the same role here, former Texas quarterback. He's not mobile in the same way Howell is. He's kind of like your big bruiser, Josh Allen type, maybe falls into the end zone, but he does take off a lot. I think those 2 players are interesting behind the Buffalo signal callers.
Okay, yeah, that seems like plenty for a 3-game slate. That's a lot of players, a lot of options that you've given and kind of broken it down pretty clearly. I can't think of a single reason for Andy Reid to lie about how much the starters are going to play in the preseason. Like, does he care about winning? He's just throwing off the opposing team. I don't understand that.
I don't think he cares. I think he's just kind of salty. He's getting asked questions about preseason playing time.
Okay.
Last year, it was literally the same thing. People were like, first week of the preseason, man, we might need to run Mahomes Kelsey stacks. There's like a quarter of Mahomes Kelsey worth playing in the preseason. Then Mahomes played 4 snaps.
Yeah, that is that's annoying. I would, if it was the regular season, I'm guessing he would be fined. That would not go over well, just lying to people. All right. Anyway, getting off topic. Anything else you want to say about quarterbacks on the early slate before we move on to running backs?
I think you could look at some of the other teams that have three players. Like Chicago has three quarterbacks. It's just, we don't know how long Fields is going to play. And then the two options behind him are pretty damn bad. Trevor Siemian and Nathan Peterman. Neither is mobile. Neither is very good. For Kansas City, I have some slight interest in Shane Buechele, former SMU signal caller. Again, I'm under the assumption that Mahomes is going to play one series if he even suits up. That leaves Chad Henne as the backup, Shane Buechele as the third stringer, and Dustin Crum as the presumed third stringer in this case, where they only have three signal callers out there. Crum is mobile, but I'm not sure he plays much. Buechele is locked into the third string job, and you see the third stringers play a lot for the Kansas City Chiefs in the preseason, so he's somewhat interesting there too.
Okay, so your favorite is actually Buechele of the Kansas City quarterbacks. He doesn't project the best, but you think he has the highest upside, it sounds like?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have them all projected evenly outside of Mahomes.
Okay. Sounds good. We got a question from Stay Odd. Thoughts on Matt Corral here? He says he looks good in camp. Do you have any interest there?
They're going to play four quarterbacks today. Mayfield is going to play. That was actually announced by the team, which we don't get very often. So you're going to see some Mayfield, Darnold, PJ Walker, and Matt Corral. It's very crowded. So even if Corral looks great, if he plays one quarter, is that better than a half of Matt Barkley? Probably not, right. But it's tough. I think they're firmly in the GPP dart throw category, and I probably won't be getting to any Carolina signal callers.
Okay, well, that answers Gary Shav's question about PJ Walker as well. Not a lot of interest there, but yeah, I mean, you throw one 80-yard bomb in the first quarter, you could be optimal as a quarterback. So you can play him if you want to take that chance, but there are other quarterbacks that'll have more opportunity. All right, anything else you want to say about quarterbacks before we move on to running backs?
No, we hit like everyone, I think. Close to it.
I mean, it's a 3-game slate. There's really not that much to talk about here. And we're going through 2 slates here, so we don't really need to belabor any of these. All right, let's move on then to running backs. Right off the top, I see Darrynton Evans is your best projected running back. Is he also your favorite on the early slate?
Yeah, I like Darrynton Evans a lot. When you look at the Chicago situation, they're going to have 4 backs active today. Technically 5. They have a fullback, but he's not projected for anything. And that's Khalil Herbert, Tristan Ebner, Darrynton Evans, and Demontre Tuggle. And I think there's a pretty clear pecking order here. Khalil Herbert's the backup. He's locked that job up, might even rival Montgomery for some snaps in the regular season. Ebner's been working ahead of Darrynton Evans in camp. These are sort of carbon copies of each other. They're smaller backs. They're pass catching backs. Ebner was awesome catching the ball at Baylor. But in the second half, I don't think you see a ton of him. I think it's more Evans and Tuggle salting away this game. I like Ebner quite a bit here too, and I'll be playing a fair amount of him, but I do have a slight preference towards Evans, and that's also reflected in the projections. But this is a very good backfield to target with just 4 here. Chicago and Carolina are the 2 teams that have 4-ish backs that will be active today.
Okay, so those are the teams that you have the most interest in are the ones that have 4 is a low number on a preseason slate like this.
Yes, for sure. And
okay.
Carolina's not exactly 4 because we don't know if McCaffrey is going to play. I'm guessing he doesn't. And then they also have a fullback. So they technically have 6 backs on their roster, but I'm only thinking 4 of them play. For Carolina, that's Deontay Foreman, Chuba Hubbard, Spencer Brown, and Darius Bradwell. Hubbard and Foreman are kind of battling for that number 2 back job right now. But I think they're both pretty much locked into roster spots unless they decide to keep the fullback, which would be a little interesting. So Spencer Brown and Bradwell are kind of these guys I think that will be salting away the game. Both of them have preseason experience. And last year, Spencer Brown played considerably more than Darius Bradwell in the preseason. He was at least 17 snaps in all 3 games, over 20 in 2 of those. Didn't have a ton of opportunity, 24 carries, rushed for 84 yards, inefficient, but most of these guys are in the preseason. Spencer Brown's probably my favorite of the situation, but I'm okay getting to some Chuba Hubbard too. He's fine.
Okay. We got a question from GQ. So you have Tristan Ebner projected slightly better than Demontre Tuggle. Is this a situation, though, where you think Tuggle has a higher upside and you're more likely to play him in GPPs, or who do you prefer of those 2?
I don't think there's significantly higher upside with either of them.
Okay.
I think the Bears are going to play most of this playing time pretty evenly. But again, I think Ebner has a roster spot unless he completely face plants in today's game and the rest of the preseason. He's a solid pass catcher too. So to me, even with Tuggle maybe playing more snaps, when Ebner's out there, they're going to be trying him out for this pass catching third down role. Think like the old Tariq Cohen role. Tuggle's just like your David Montgomery, UDFA, maybe makes the practice squad, but most likely he's just cut. He was a timeshare back at Ohio in the MAC. He couldn't even win the starting job there.
Okay. So I spent a lot of time on Twitter, and I've learned through Twitter that Isaiah Pacheco is actually the Chiefs RB1 and a future Hall of Famer. And yet you have him expected to play in this preseason game. Can you break down that Chiefs backfield for me a little bit?
Yeah, we can talk about Pacheco. He's a hot name right now. Again, so Andy Reid says the starters are going to play quarter. How much does Edwards-Helaire actually play? I don't know. Maybe a series, maybe two. Jerick McKinnon, I think, kind of falls in this role too. He's a veteran. He's played with the team before, and he has a clear pass catching role for this team. How much do they need to see of McKinnon? I don't think Pacheco's locked up a job yet. I still think he's competing with Ronald Jones. Now he's ahead of Ronald Jones for sure, but they brought Ronald Jones in for a reason. If you look at Pacheco over his career, he could never win the job at Rutgers. He averaged 4.5 yards per carry there, which is very bad. So it's kind of a rare blend of a really inefficient prospect, not highly drafted, coming into the NFL and making a roster spot. That doesn't happen a lot. Not saying it can't happen, but all this to say, they actually need to see what he puts on the field. So I think you're going to see Pacheco. You're going to see Ronald Jones, Derek Gore, Tanfleet Davis. The problem is that's a lot of names. So you have a very crowded backfield here with upwards of 7 players. Again, some of that could be that dwindled down to like 5. Edwards-Helaire and McKinnon don't play, but it's still a lot of names to target in this backfield.
Okay, so it sounds like you're not totally buying the hype with Pacheco. You say you don't think he's going to even make the 53-man roster, or you think that there's a chance that he doesn't?
Beat reporters seem to be back and forth on whether the Chiefs keep 4 running backs or 4 tight ends. Last year they kept 4 tight ends. I don't know for sure. If it were me, I would keep 4 tight ends. But if they keep 4, I think Pacheco makes it for sure. If they keep 3, I think it's between him and Ronald Jones.
Interesting. Okay. I've been drafting a lot of Isaiah Pacheco. I've actually been drafting less since the hype has really gotten strong, because now people are drafting him really early. I used to be I could get him in the last round of every best ball draft, and I was loving that with the high upside. But
I'm old enough to remember Darwin Thompson.
That's been a discussion on Twitter as well. Like, is he just another Darwin Thompson? We've seen late round QB, I think, did a whole thread on how he's not Darwin Thompson. Nobody, I don't think any of us really know.
Darwin was probably a better prospect.
You think so?
He was more productive. He actually had a starting job in college.
Yeah, I guess that is true. So not totally buying the hype on Isaiah Pacheco. But maybe today he might have an opportunity to prove out and make that roster. All right. Top 5 RBs for the early slate. Tem Yelnats asked. I think we've kind of been going over that. It sounds like it's largely the Chicago and Washington backfields for you.
Carolina would be 2. Washington's right there, though. We haven't talked about that team. They have 5 running backs, depending on how much Antonio Gibson plays. We're not sure about his playing time. J.D. McKissic is out. So that leaves Jarrett Patterson, Brian Robinson, Jonathan Williams, and Reggie Bonifant. Bonifan's a special teamer. So I think they're going to take a long look at Patterson and Robinson today. Patterson actually made the roster last year as a UDFA out of Buffalo, but he's this minuscule back who doesn't catch passes. Robinson's actually highly drafted. I think Robinson plays over him, but you're going to see both of them a lot because they kind of played the same role and they know what they have in McKissic and Gibson. Those are the top 5 situations I would look at. It's more of a top 6, but the 2 Chicago Bears guys, Evans and Ebner, then Carolina, looking at Spencer Brown and Chuba Hubbard. Then with Washington, it's Jarrett Patterson and Brian Robinson. I don't think there's too much separating them, but I would lean Chicago 1, Carolina 2, Washington 3.
Okay. We kind of went over the Kansas City backfield a little. I don't remember if you mentioned Jerrion Ealy. We got a question about Ealy. Do you have any interest there today?
He's been moving back and forth between slot receiver and running back in camp. So I'm honestly not sure where they're going to have him line up in camp today. His best path, is probably slot receiver. He's a little tiny guy, but I don't know where he's going to play.
Seems like a preseason would be the kind of opportunity to, throw him some chances at slot receivers. That would be kind of fun. Maybe he's kind of a wild card. He doesn't project all that well. Maybe that means he's not going to get a lot of steam around the industry, but if he's lining up different places, that could be kind of fun. Do you see any upside there? Do you think there's a chance that he, scores a touchdown or gets 4 catches?
I think it's probably far-fetched, but
okay,
he's one of the guys you could definitely play. We see some of them. I see a question in the chat. Kind of the GPP situation I would look at is Buffalo that just came through. They're going to have 5 backs today, but two of them, I guess, Devin Singletary and James Cook. I don't know how much they play. Josh Allen's out. I'm not anticipating seeing Diggs and Gabriel Davis. It's not like you have a locked in bell cow starter, but I think there's a pretty clear pecking order here with Singletary and Cook. And even Zach Moss has gotten a lot of hype and seems to have solidified a roster spot. Behind those players, you have Tywan Jones, who's a pure special teamer, Duke Johnson, and Raheem Blackshear. This is a GPP situation for all the uncertainty, but if it breaks your way, you could see Duke Johnson, Raheem Blackshear handle a majority of the work. That is a situation where you would need the Bills to take a very cautious approach with Singletary, Cook, and Moss. But I think there is upside with Duke Johnson and Raheem Blackshear. Those are two guys that don't project very well because of how many backs they have active. But in certain scenarios, if the Bills are cautious, they could end up spiking to the top.
Okay. We do need to move along pretty quickly. We got a question about the Colts backfield. Do you want to touch on that at all? Do you have any?
There's 7 guys that are going to play.
Okay. So you don't feel like you really want to play the Colts a ton, it sounds like. Anything else you want to say about running backs before we move on?
No, we're good here for the early.
All right. And guys, remember to check out our preseason DFS projections provided by Matt. We're giving them to you for only $5 for a limited time only. So grab them now. You can find the link to claim your $5 preseason projections in the description below, or use promo code TUA at checkout. That's TUA at checkout. All right. Then let's move on to early slate wide receivers. What do you like in there?
There's 2 teams that stand out here. Chicago, 1, they have 8 active receivers. Buffalo is 2, they have 9. The rest of the teams are double digits or pretty close to it. So looking at Chicago, you have injuries to Byron Pringle, Velus Jones, N'Keal Harry, and David Moore. We're probably not going to see a ton of Darnell Mooney, which means some of these practice squad guys, some of them might actually make the roster, but Equanimeous St. Brown should play a fair amount. Isaiah Coulter is a guy who's going to get a lot of run tonight. He's been moving up the depth chart, and he's actually gotten some run with the first team because of injuries, but he's still firmly in a tryout against guys like Tajay Sharp, Simba Webster, and Daz Newsome. I'm going to be playing one of Isaiah Coulter, Tajay Sharp, Simba Webster, and Daz Newsome in just about every single lineup, looking at it right now, with a preference towards Coulter because of how well he's played in camp.
Okay, so the Chicago wide receivers, are they kind of your number one? Chicago, Buffalo, it sounds like are your top 2. Do you have any strong preference there? It sounds like Chicago, you're going to be playing everywhere. So that's your number 1 spot.
Love Chicago. Buffalo's right there too. They have 9 active receivers, but again, this could be as little as 5 because Stephon Diggs, he's a bona fide starter. How much do they see him? Gabe Davis has kind of played his way into that role. Isaiah McKenzie and Crowder have both been banged up in camp. They've been practicing recently, but still, I think it's safe to say Buffalo is going to take a cautious approach with them. That leaves it leaves Khalil Shakir, Jake Kumaro, Isaiah Hodgins, Tanner Gentry, and Neil Pau'u. I'm also playing at least one of these guys in just about every single lineup. Just looking down, I think literally every single lineup, I have at least one Bill and at least one Bear. Many of them have 2 of these guys. In Buffalo, I think it's a preference towards Hodgins. Because of the Marquez Stevenson injury and the Tavon Austin injury, there's actually a roster spot that could be open here. I think it's Hodgins and Kumaro battling for it right now. Both those guys should play a ton today, but Pau'u and Gentry are going to play a lot on the back end. Shakir, he's been banged up at times, but I think they'll probably want to see what they have out of the rookie too. Those are 5 solid players.
Okay. So we've covered those situations pretty well. What other receiving cores or individual receivers do you have interest in for the early slate?
I think Isaiah Ford, Desmond Patman are interesting for Indianapolis. That's a really crowded room, so that's just GPPs. Going to Kansas City, a guy that's gotten some hype is Darius Fountain. He's gotten bounced around some teams, but he's been pretty productive in previous preseasons when he's been healthy. Washington, they have 11 healthy receivers. I think you're looking at Dax Milne and Alex Erickson, maybe some Cam Sims and Diami Brown, but Dax Milne is probably the guy I would look at most there as a back of the roster type player. And then Carolina, it's tough to evaluate because DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, how much do they play? But I think you're looking at a guy like Shi Smith, who's a second-year player for that team, came out of South Carolina. Those are the crowded situations, and those are just the names I would prefer for those teams in GPPs, but not a ton of them. It's mostly focused on Chicago and Buffalo.
Okay. And Orain Holder asks, how do you feel about Sky Moore? And I guess I'll open it up. Do you have any overarching thoughts about Kansas City receivers today?
Sky Moore, I think, is a lock to make this team. I think he's going to play more with Patrick Mahomes in the second and third preseason games. So I just have questions about his snaps, but I think he'll play more than like Mahomes or someone like that. So probably I'm avoiding him, but you could get to him. It's kind of like I don't have a good parallel, but he'll play some today.
Okay. Any other receivers that you want to talk about?
Those are the main ones. There's a ton of them. So if you have questions about a specific guy, throw it into chat and we'll address it. But those are my favorites from the crowded teams.
Okay. And we got a question. Can you play both quarterbacks for Showdown? Jermaine Dorsey asks. I'm not sure if he means from the same team or I guess I would assume that's a question on FanDuel.
I think he's talking about the Bills.
Okay. Just the Bills. Okay. Do you think you can play both Bills quarterbacks on the same Showdown team?
You definitely can. I'm going to check the Showdowns. I don't know which one. Yeah, Buffalo has a Showdown. It's the second one they play in the afternoon slot. I think you can certainly play them both.
Okay. Anthony Masili asks, who was the last Buffalo wide receiver? Do you know which one was the last one that you mentioned?
Neil Pau'u is the last on the depth chart.
Okay.
I'm playing him still though.
You're playing so okay. So you really like the Buffalo receivers. What about Jahan Dotson? I assume that's who he's talking about, the rookie.
You're just not expecting the starters to get a lot of run here, and Dotson's firmly a starter.
Okay. All right. So yeah, there are a lot of wide receivers, but we will move on to tight ends. And if you have questions about any of these individual wide receivers, we can go back and talk about them. Let's move on though to tight ends. Who are some of your favorite tight ends for the early slate?
Two teams have 3 active tight ends, so it's pretty narrow for a couple of these teams. Carolina, you're looking at Tommy Tremble, Stephen Sullivan, and Jared Scott. They're actually all pretty good receiving options. Tommy Tremble, he's a former H-back, so he kind of played like half tight end, half fullback at Notre Dame, but he has since moved into more of a full-time tight end role. It is going to take some development, but I think Carolina views him as the long-term replacement to a replaceable Ian Thomas. He'll play a lot. Stephen Sullivan's more of a receiving tight end. He'll be out there as well. Was banged up at parts of camp. And then even Jared Scott's pretty solid. There's not much to say about him. He's going to get cut, but he's playing in a room with just 3 other tight ends, so he'll get time today. Chicago's the exact same thing. You have injuries, more just playing time concerns for all the top 3 tight ends, leaving Rice and John, Jake Tongs, and Chase Allen. Of these players, I like Jake Tongs the most. He was a pure receiving tight end at Cal. Chase Allen was more of a blocker, and he played kind of like a backup rotational tight end role. I think Tongs is a player you can look to with good receiving upside. Those are my 2 favorite situations for tight ends, and I'm probably focusing most of my attention there with Washington coming in third. They're going to have 4 active tight ends, but a couple of them are interesting. You have a couple blocking options here, so it sort of narrows it even further. Armani Rogers played quarterback in college, and he's now making the transition to tight end. I think he's probably the guy to look at if you're targeting one of the 4 Washington tight ends. And then the other situations are just too crowded for me to look at.
Okay. So it looks like a fairly similar situation to yesterday, where we just have a lot of tight ends that aren't separated by that much in terms of projection. Kind of today we get up to nearly 3.5 fantasy point projection for Jared Scott, and then a bunch down to the 2 fantasy point range. So a lot of guys you can play, nobody who really stands out as like a must play today. You prefer the Chicago and Carolina situation first, followed by Washington, it sounds like.
Yep.
Okay. We also got a question. Chuba, GQ says Chuba started. I assume he means Chuba Hubbard. I said, does that make you like Brown more? I don't know what situation he's referring to. Do you know what Brown is?
Carolina. Spencer Brown is their like
Spencer Brown.
Big grind. He's like the direct backup to like a Deontay Foreman type.
Okay. So does Chuba starting make you like Spencer Brown more?
I like Spencer Brown a little bit more than Chuba just because I think there's more upside in the second half. I projected them pretty close because this is still uncertain. This is just me walking down Narrative Street looking at beat reporters from camp, but I think they deserve to be closely projected. I personally prefer Brown a little bit more.
Okay. And then Brandon Scott asks, is Carolina's Rashad Higgins worth playing?
He's pure GPP.
Okay. Anthony Masili asks, back to tight ends, do you think OJ Howard plays today?
I do. I don't think he plays a ton. I think you're mostly looking at Tommy Sweeney and Quentin Morris.
Okay. All right. So we're at 11:29 already. I guess 12:29 Eastern time. So we've got we're about halfway through the show. So we should close up the early slate with talking some defenses. Do you have any different takes on defenses today, or are you just once again kind of splitting them up evenly?
Yeah, I'm just splitting them up evenly. To break your ties, I mean, go against the bad quarterbacks. Like Buffalo, you're not seeing Josh Allen at all. Kansas City, you're seeing a lot of Trevor Siemian and and Nathan Peterman. Like those are two great quarterbacks to face. Carolina, you're going to be playing against some good guys like Baker Mayfield, a high draft pick. Washington, Carson Wentz, Heineke started games, and Sam Howell's a high draft pick. If I'm breaking ties, I mean, I'm going to split my exposure evenly, but if you're playing one lineup, I would use some of these as ties. Like Indianapolis, they're a solid defense because you're facing those backups, but that's really what I'm thinking about defense. Nothing too crazy.
Okay. Gary Shav wants us to give a top 5 for each position, but we are already halfway through the show and the late slate is larger than the early slate. So if we have time at the end, we will do that, Gary, but otherwise you can go back to the beginning and just listen at 1.5 speed or something to try to catch up. Because we kind of, each position we started with Matt's favorites there. So you should be able to find it there. But we are going to need to move on to the late slate. Anything else you want to say about the early slate before we do move on though, Matt?
Nah, we're good.
All right, guys, before we move on to the late slate, let me tell you about our sponsor, Prize Picks. Prize Picks offers daily prop-based contests. You can use promo code AWESEMO, that's AWESEMO, for a $100 first match deposit bonus. No sharks, optimizers, or mass entries on Prize Picks. You can make 5-player lineups that can net you up to 10x your entry fee. Use your knowledge of multiple sports with cross-sport entries. Click the link in the video description below to head to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app in the App Store or on Google Play. All right, we better move right on to the late slate now. This one has 5 games in it. We got to do the same thing. Let's go position by position. We'll start at the top with quarterbacks. Matt, who do you like on the late slate as far as quarterbacks go?
You don't worry about rushing. We can just skip tight end when we get there. And
Okay.
You'll find out why really quick.
All right, good.
So with quarterback, we have the Rams on the slate. The Rams are like the Green Bay Packers. It's funny, there's some connections there, but they don't play any of their starters at all. If you even sniff the starting lineup, or maybe you have a remote chance of playing games this year, you're not playing in the preseason. That means we're not seeing Stafford or his backup, John Wolford. Wolford just flat out won't play because he's an important piece of their team. If Stafford goes down, Sean McVay does not want Wolford playing snaps in the preseason. That means we are going to see Bryce Perkins and Luis Perez for most of this game with a lean towards Bryce Perkins. Bryce Perkins, he's an elite dual threat. He's like a Lamar Jackson level dual threat, just not as talented. Came out of Virginia. He's played in previous preseasons with the Rams, and he is awesome. He's the number 1 quarterback play on the slate. I think there's a chance he plays like 3 quarters. Perez, he's bounced around all of the sub leagues, AAF, USFL, you name it. He's played in it. He's a pocket statue. And he's a middling passer. I think you can play Perez because of how narrow this is, but Bryce Perkins is a clear preference based on the mobility. Even with a couple rushes, he's going to do really well for you in your lineups, assuming he doesn't get injured. Love Bryce Perkins.
All right, that's I like that take. That's a strong take. Bryce Perkins, QB1 for the late slate. Luis Perez, USFL darling, probably not going to do quite as well as Bryce Perkins here. All right, moving on after Bryce Perkins, who do you like at quarterback?
So there's a tier, I think, just behind Bryce Perkins, which is comprised of like 3 to 4 players. Denver is going to be pretty narrow, I think, because we're not expecting to see a ton of Russell Wilson. So that leaves Brett Rippon and Josh Johnson. Josh Johnson's actually played real life games in the NFL. I think he's battling Rippon for the backup job. He used to be mobile once upon a time, but he's like 36 years old or something now. So I don't think he's going to run a ton. Well, he's competent. So I like that out of a player that's going to see at least a half. Josh Johnson's definitely stands out in that regard. From there, you have Ian Book for New Orleans. Jameis Winston's hurt. So this is another narrow situation where you're just looking really at Andy Dalton and Ian Book. Dalton is their clear backup. Book, I believe he was a 7th round pick. He maybe was a UDFA, but he came out of Notre Dame and he kind of has sneaky mobility, sort of in that Josh Allen level of mobility, not Lamar Jackson, but he's going to play most of the game and he has just the rushing upside. Even if he gives you a little bit as a passer, that's going to be a bonus. And the last guy that kind of fits this bill is Skylar Thompson out of Miami, not Miami to college. He plays for the Dolphins. Tua, I don't think is playing. Mike McDaniel hinted at this. That means it's just Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson. Bridgewater's the locked-in backup. Skylar Thompson is another mobile quarterback who came out of Kansas State, who's actually a really solid passer there too, but he just got hurt in his final season. All these guys have sneaky mobility, and they all have upside to play at least a half of football, if not more. So they're right behind Perkins in terms of the tiers.
My only recollection of Ian Book, who you mentioned, is I feel like he came in and just did absolutely nothing in an NFL. I think it was an island game, so it was like a showdown slate where I played a ton of Ian Book, and just from the beginning, I was like, okay, this guy cannot play in the NFL. Maybe he's gotten better since that time, but I guess we'll find out today. We got a super chat from Picasso TV. Any love for the Kelsey Meister today?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Any love for Travis Kelsey today?
I think he plays like 4 snaps.
Okay, so not a lot of love there.
Not a lot of love.
Maybe he catches an 80-yard bomb, but you probably don't want to count on that. Okay, so that you've covered a lot of the late slate quarterbacks already. Anybody else that you want to mention that you're going to be playing today?
So there's like the Bryce Perkins tier. I think he's by himself. And then you have Book, Thompson, and Johnson. They're all kind of like upwards of a half and mobile. Then there's a couple guys that might play at upwards of a half, but they just have no rushing upside whatsoever. Brett Rippon is one of these guys, the counterpart to Josh Johnson in that offense. Kyle Trask is allegedly going to play most of this game. Brady's away from the team. And this is more just what the beat reporters are saying. They do have 3 quarterbacks on the roster, Trask, Gabbert, and Ryan Griffin. But Trask was drafted by this team last year. He's not mobile, but he might play a half. And this is entirely based on beat reporter speculation. Then you have the Chargers, Easton Stick, Brandon Peters. They're going to play around a couple quarters. I think you're getting a little thinner there. And with how strong the options are at the top, I'm not sure you need to play a lot of these GPP dart throw signal callers. Maybe you could include like a Cooper Rush, but I'm probably not getting to those guys.
Okay, you just don't need to take those chances because we have some pretty strong quarterbacks at the top.
I think so. You're going to see a lot more volatility in terms of playing time at running back and receiver. So I think you can hone in on a couple quarterbacks, the one tight end you should be playing, and then figure out the rest of your lineup from there.
Okay. So I know we're in quarterbacks now, but Carlos Manzo asks a prize picks question. So I feel like I got to ask this question. How do you feel about Darnell Mooney's 1.5 reception prop? Would you rather have the over or the under there?
I think the over. Fields and Mooney are going to play a little bit. I don't think a ton, but they're gonna try to open things up a little bit with Fields while he's out there.
So we found a prop you like on Prize Picks. That's awesome.
I didn't back reference this against the projections. That was just off intuition. So I can take a look while we go to the next one.
Okay. So we've covered quarterbacks pretty well then?
Yeah.
All right, then let's move on and talk about some late slate running backs. We got 10 teams here to talk about, but just you can just give us who are your favorite running backs on the late slate?
Yeah, there's a couple teams you should really be honing in on. So even though we have 10 teams, you're probably only considering 4 or 5. One you should certainly consider is Tampa Bay. With Brady absent from the team, they're not expected to play any starters. That includes Leonard Fournette. And I honestly think Giovanni Bernard might not play either because of his veteran status. That leaves Rashaad White, Keyshawn Vaughn, and special teamer Kenyon Barner. Rashaad White and Keyshawn Vaughn are going to handle an absurd workload today, and we know White's specialty is as a receiving back. He's also a rookie kind of vying. I don't think he's vying for a roster spot, but I think he's vying for a role. Like if he plays well enough, maybe he takes Leonard Fournette off third downs. So I think you do see White today, and I think you see Keyshawn Vaughn. I prefer White based on the the receiving upside, but you can't go wrong playing either of those guys. They're both in the top 3 in terms of projection.
Okay, so the Tampa Bay backfield is where we start off for the late slate. Who do you like outside of those guys?
Yeah, Tampa Bay is just so narrow. Dallas is also pretty narrow. They're not going to play Ezekiel Elliott at all. I think Tony Pollard is probably at least on a pitch count, like a severe one, maybe 1 series at best. And then Ryan Nall got hurt. That leaves 3 running backs, Rico Dowdle, who is their third stringer. He played that role last year. He's locked into it. Malik Davis and Aaron Shampkin. Malik Davis should play a ton today because they have like 3.5 active backs if you consider Pollard one of them. If you don't consider Pollard, it's just flat out 3. So it's another situation with a ton of available playing time. Denver's also like this. Javonte and Melvin both aren't playing, and they had some injuries behind them. So they have Mike Boone and Max Borghi. They actually had to sign 2 players within the last 2 days in Jaquan Hardy and Stevie Scott. So these players haven't even been practicing with the team. I think you see a ton of Mike Boone and a pretty good amount of Max Borghi too, who's not very good. He was on the Colts earlier this offseason, and he was already cut and released, but we just don't have any available bodies for these backfields. I think those are the top 3 you should be considering. And then honestly, New Orleans is pretty thin too. When you look at what they're going to be trotting out there, no Mark Ingram, no Kamara. You have Tony Jones, Dwayne Washington, Devine Ozigbo, and Abram Smith. I think Abram Smith is going to play a fair amount here. He came out of Baylor. He was very efficient, but he's a late transition to the running back position. He played linebacker his first couple of years in college. I think there's a chance he could jump Devine Ozigbo and Dwayne Washington with positive performance. I think Abram Smith and Tony Jones are fine plays. And those are the top 4 running back situations on the late slate. A couple other guys I think you can use in tournaments, but if you're really honing in on smaller fields, those are the guys I'd look to.
Okay. Orain Holder wants to know about the Dolphins backfield. I don't see anybody from the Dolphins backfield projected very well here. What's that situation for you?
It's just a lot wider. So the situations that we don't have projected as well, like the Dolphins have 5 backs playing today. So a lot of these teams that we just talked about have 3.5 because one of the starters is on a pitch count. Miami has 5 with Sony Michel, Gaskin, Ahmed, Zaquandre White, and Jared Dokes. I think if you're looking at one of those guys, it's probably Zaquandre White. He sort of profiles like a Sony Michel. So if he could maybe beat out like a Gaskin or an Ahmed, then maybe he makes the roster. But even that's a little bit harder to see his path to a ceiling comparatively. But I mean, some of these running backs are going to pop if they score touchdowns, and he could be one of them.
Did you already talk about Jaylen Warren? We got a question about Jaylen Warren. He's
I forgot about Pittsburgh.
Okay.
All
right,
sorry, there's so many. That's another really good spot to target too. Only 4 running backs active for them. So excuse me, they're firmly in that Dallas tier, Denver tier. And no Najee Harris, no Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland, Jaylen Warren, Mateo Durant, and Master Teague are the players that are on this team. Mateo Durant was recently injured. He only returned to practice this week. Master Teague was signed this week because of a previous injury. Jaylen Warren is a guy that might beat out an Anthony McFarland for a roster spot. He formerly played at Utah State, transferred to Oklahoma State last year, handled a massive workload, and he catches the ball extremely well, which is why I think he might be someone they look at over Anthony McFarland. They don't really have a strong pass catcher on the roster right now behind Harris. Benny Snell certainly isn't catching any passes. So Warren's going to get a lot of work today. He is firmly in play and one of the top options as well.
Okay. Yeah, it was. I thought maybe you had touched on him already and I missed it, but we got a question.
No, that was my fault. I'm sorry.
He's your second best projected running back. So I figured you probably liked him.
Yeah, I just forgot. My bad.
No worries. We got there. Any other running backs that you want to talk about before we move on?
I think we hit most of them. I'll look quick while you move on, but I think we got most of them. Yeah.
Okay. And say I asked, would you prefer Boone over Warren based on your projections of what you just said? It sounds like you would like Warren better than Boone. Is that correct? Or I guess They're projected close enough that, okay. So you have a preference for Warren over Mike Boone. Fun story. Mike Boone once was in one of my $10,000 lineup for me on FanDuel. He got me 1 fantasy point, and if he had been able to convert from the 1 yard line, it would have been $100,000 lineup for me. So thanks a lot, Mike Boone. All right, let's move on to actually, before we talk about wide receivers, let me tell you about our Best Ball Draft Kit. Our Best Ball Draft Kit is live for the 2022 season for only $69.99 this season. Get access to our Best Ball Unlimited package, which includes Best Ball and season-long fantasy football rankings, underdog daily draft rankings, our Best Ball stacking guide, cheat sheets, premium articles, and more. If you don't want to pay that price, we have good news. You can get all of this 100% free when you sign up and make your first deposit with Underdog Fantasy. Even better, Underdog will match that first deposit up to $100. So click the link in the video description below or use promo code Stokastic. That's STOKASTIC to claim this exclusive offer now. All right, let's talk some late slate wide receivers. Who do you like today?
Neil, you didn't play preseason last year, but we got the exact same situation. The Rams are running it back. They're not playing any of their guys, and we're going to see like maybe 5 to 6 active receivers. Last year, we had guys like JJ Koski and Landon Akers playing like 75 snaps in games, which is completely unheard of. Like a team's third string usually maxes out at like 27, 30 snaps, somewhere in there. And we're going to see the same thing. Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, all out. Brandon Powell hurt. Jacob Harris hurt. Warren Jackson's questionable for this game. And if Warren Jackson plays, that only makes 6 receivers. Best case scenario, you're looking at 5. And I honestly think you're probably not going to see a ton of Skowronek either because he's locked into the wide receiver 3 or 4 role, depending on Van Jefferson's health. Tutu Atwell at this point looks like a lock to make the roster, and he's going to cameo as a kick returner at times. I think JJ Koski, Lance McCutcheon, and Landon Akers are going to play a ton, and they have upwards of the same snap shares they saw last preseason, which was literally literally 70 plus snaps in some of these games. You should be honing in on these Rams guys, and they make a natural stack with Bryce Perkins, which you shouldn't necessarily be prioritizing. It just so happens that playing time works out this way, but you're going to see a lot for these guys.
So it's Koski, McCutcheon, and Akers for you at the top. You have Skowronek and Atwell behind them. So they're projected only slightly worse, but it sounds like there's a clear tier there for you, those top three before Skowronek and Atwell.
Yeah, I just have a little more concerns about their playing time, but even if they see 30, 40 snaps, which is awesome for preseason, you'd love it. And that's where they're kind of in that range right now, but they have a little more of a floor. They could play maybe like 20 snaps if McVay's like, we need these guys on the roster. We just don't want to risk it, which he's done before.
Okay. And I guess Warren Jackson is also, so your top 6 receivers are all from the Rams here. Warren Jackson rounds it out.
He's a guy you need to watch though. He's questionable for the game. So if you play Warren Jackson, watch Twitter.
Okay. So there's a chance he doesn't play the game. If he does play the game, does that increase do you have any interest in him? I mean, you have him ranked 6th out of all of these guys as is. Would that remain the same even if he is active?
Yeah. And I'll try to update the projections. Hopefully we get this at a reasonable time. If it's right before lock, I would just, if you're using Fantasy Cruncher or something, I'd just use the thumbs up bump him because he'll play a full snap share if he's active.
Okay. Orion Holder wants to know about how many snaps you see Kenny Pickett taking.
I think he's going to take a fair amount, but unfortunately, they're going to use 4 quarterbacks today. And their coaching staff has said they're all going to take a quarter. We don't know that in stone. Like even last night, 2 nights ago when the Titans played, I don't remember. Their plan was to give Malik Willis the first half, and then they decided randomly they wanted to go have him play a little bit in the second half too. So these are fluid situations, but roughly a quarter for Pickett.
Okay. We move so slowly through the first half, the early slate, first 3 games. It looks like we're actually making good time now. If we're not going to be talking about tight ends very long, we're doing pretty well timing wise. All right. So we've pretty well covered the Rams receiving core. Who do you like outside of that group?
Outside the Rams, that's clearly the number 1 team, in my opinion. But there's a couple other players I think you could look at. They're more like situational one-offs. Miami's like evaluating a couple guys. So I think Eric Ezukanma is somebody you could use. We're not going to see Tyreek Hill, Waddle, or Wilson. So they should be using 8 receivers. I think Trent Sherfield and Mohamed Sanu are pretty much locked up in terms of roster spots. So you have like Eric Ezukanma, who was drafted on day 3 out of Texas Tech, taking on guys like Preston Williams and Lynn Bowden for the roster spot. And I think he has the edge, but Eric Ezukanma is my favorite in that situation. I guess we could just go team by team quickly. Seattle has 10 receivers, so that's pretty wide. If you're playing anyone there, it's Bo Melton or Derek Young. Those are the 2 guys that are evaluating for back of the roster spots. We just talked Miami. Pittsburgh's going to have 9 receivers. I think Calvin Austin's probably the guy you want to look at. He was a late round draft pick out of Memphis for them. He's more of your slot receiver, kick returner type. Tampa Bay, they're going to have 9 healthy receivers. For them, it's mostly looking at like a Scotty Miller or a Jalen Darden. New Orleans is going to have 10 healthy receivers today. To be honest with you, not very many stand out here. It's probably Kirk Merritt or Aesop Winston, just players that have received positive practice reports. Houston has 9. It's probably Connor Weddington. This roster looks pretty set in stone with Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins, Chris Moore, and Chris Conley as the top options. From there, I think it's Philip Dorsett, Connor Weddington, and Jalen Camp battling just for some names. Dallas has 10 receivers, probably Simi Fehoko. He might make the roster just based on injuries. Denver has 10 receivers as well. Montreal Washington has received a ton of hype here. He projects fairly well, but again, this is all based on playing time. And then we talked about the Rams. The Chargers have 8 healthy receivers. This is kind of a sneaky spot. I actually like this more than most of the situations we talked about, except the Rams. You're not going to see Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. We know Guyton and Palmer have a role. So that leaves DeAndre Carter, Michael Bandy, Joe Reed, Jason Moore, Maurice French, and Trayvon Bradford as 6 healthy receivers. In there, I think Joe Reed is the most interesting. He was actually drafted by the team. Versatile receiver, pretty big too, came out of Virginia. He's the player I prefer the most here, but you could use Carter or Bandy with some relative confidence. But if you have questions about specific players, feel free to throw them in there. I think that hits on most of the at least relatively highly projected guys.
For a 5-game slate, it looks like there are a lot of receivers who are playable. So yeah, if you have questions, we can cover them. But the Rams receiving core seems like the the top tier by itself, the top of the Rams receiving core, followed by a lot of playable options, but nobody who really stands out. All right, anything else you want to say about wide receivers? Seems like we covered them pretty well.
For sure, what you just said, I just want to echo that. Quarterback, I think, is pretty set in stone. Running back, not quite as much, but there's a clear couple tiers. Receivers, where I like to spread things out a little more. I'm going to be playing at least one Ram in every lineup. In a lot of lineups, I'll have two, and then trying to spread it around from there, just based on how volatile it is. We saw that last night as an example, and we'll continue to see it through the preseason. Tight end, you should be just playing one guy.
I just clicked on your tight end projections for the first time, and I understand immediately why we don't need to talk long about tight end. You want to explain this to the audience?
Jeff Driscoll is a quarterback who is mislabeled as a tight end. Think Taysom Hill. And he is the quarterback projected for the most playing time, more than any other player on this slate. First of all, Houston has 3 quarterbacks on their roster. Kyle Allen tested positive for COVID. He's not playing. Davis Mills is only playing a series or 2. Jeff Driscoll's floor projection is 3 quarters, and he's mobile. And now he's a tight end.
Is that on both slates, both FanDuel and DraftKings? Do you know off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I didn't check FanDuel.
So at least on DraftKings, Jeff Driscoll is far and away where you go at tight end. Let's see if we can
He's a quarterback on FanDuel, so we can talk about the rest of the tight ends too. But on DraftKings, I don't think you even consider another tight end.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you whatever he's gonna, I mean, what's his floor here is 10 fantasy points if he's playing most of the game at quarterback. He's probably not going to get much less than 10 fantasy points, and that's a ceiling for just about any other tight end on a preseason slate. So yeah, it sounds pretty obvious to just go Jeff Driscoll at tight end on DraftKings. But we'll talk about the rest of them a little bit, just because you're going to need to play one of them on FanDuel. So who do you like for tight ends outside of Jeff Driscoll?
The Chargers are fairly narrow, and they have some receiving options. You're going to see 3 guys for the Chargers: Hunter Kampmoyer, Eric Cromenheck, and Sage Surratt. Now, these guys don't have the same roles. It's not like they're two-way tight ends. These guys actually play specific roles. That's kind of the way the Chargers look at their tight ends. Surratt is a pure receiver. He actually played receiver at Wake Forest. He just played in the USFL. He was listed as a tight end, but he's basically a big slot receiver there. Cromenheck is a blocker. So I think even though you have 3 tight ends active, Surratt is probably the number one here. Just the way that the projections work out. Neither of them have a sample in the NFL, so they both project very similarly. But I would go with Surratt if you're only picking one. If you're playing multiple lineups, I would still spread, because this is a very volatile situation. But Sage Surratt is my favorite.
Okay. So Chargers tight ends, kind of the number 2 situation, with Sage Surratt being the top of it, and then you can play the others. I see the Pittsburgh tight ends are not all that far behind either. I assume Freiermuth, looks like Freiermuth is not going to be playing today. So can you break down the Pittsburgh? Do you like the Pittsburgh tight ends? Would you get down that far, or would you stick to just the Chargers?
On FanDuel, yeah, we're exclusively talking about FanDuel now. I would be spreading ownership at tight end. It's just so volatile. And outside of Driscoll, nobody has a projection higher than 3.5. The Steelers tight ends are Kevin Rader, Jay Sternberger, and Connor Hayward. Connor Hayward is a late transition to the position. He started his career as a running back. Then he moved to a fullback, H-back hybrid. Now he's playing full tight end. So he's extremely athletic, and he catches the ball, moves well with the ball. He's a guy I like here. Sternberger, he was a really good tight end prospect coming out of college, and he sort of faded since he came out with the Packers. Rader, I think, is still fine. I would prefer Hayward and Sternberger, but all 3 of these guys are also in play as well.
Brevin Jordan's been picking up some steam in best ball. Do you think he's going to be playing much today? I think he's Houston's number 1 tight end, is he not?
Yeah, I think he is. I was a little worried when they tried to trade for Adam Shaheen and then he failed his physical.
Yeah, not a good sign.
Good for Brevin. Pharaoh Brown's definitely not your receiving option. Tegan Quatoriano is a pure blocker. So I think with the Texans tight end situation, you have 5 guys out there, but Brevin Jordan's clearly your receiving option. He makes sense here. Again, tight end is so volatile. I'm willing to take shots on guys like Brevin Jordan in crowded situations just because of how volatile the position is.
Okay. Anything else that you want to say about tight ends more generally?
Just looking for dart throws. Again, you mentioned Brevin Jordan. I think he's solid. Cade Otton was a pretty high draft pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're going to need him. with Gronk retiring, you're not going to see Bray today. So that makes a lot of sense. Dylan Parham for Denver, just a name to throw out there.
Any relation?
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a good question. But from there, I think if you just rely on the projections and use a fair amount of randomness, you should be pretty good at tight end.
Okay. Sounds good. Would you ever play 2 tight ends in a lineup, like on DraftKings, even with Jeff Driscoll locked into the TE spot? Never playing a tight end in the flex?
No way.
All right. That was an easy answer there. All right. We did get a question. Should Jalen Tolbert for Dallas play much?
I don't think he's going to play a ton, just because they've already basically messed up their roster at receiver. He needs to be their wide receiver 2 right now. So I think I don't even know if you see CD. I think you see Tolbert for a little bit just because he's a young player. He needs to get some reps, but I think he's quickly pulled.
Okay. And back to the late slate for defenses. I guess that is the late slate. But defenses, do you have anything different than what you've been saying? You're just going to be spreading out defenses once again?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So then anything else that you want to say about the late slate?
I saw a question in the chat about playing. I can't remember the situation, but it was essentially, can you play these 2 running backs from the same team? Maybe it was Tampa Bay. I think the answer is yes. I don't know this for a fact because we don't have ownership projections, but I think you might even get an edge if you play like Rachaad White and Keyshawn Vaughn together, because like, let's just hypothetically say one plays the first half, one plays the second half. That's still more playing time than a lot of these other backs are going to get. And people, I think, could be shying away from this because they are on the same team. But again, that's not how you should be thinking about preseason DFS. You need to think about raw playing time. And if it comes from the same team, like these guys aren't cannibalizing each other necessarily. You need to look at it in relation to the entire slate.
Okay. Should we try to answer Gary Shav's questions? Do you think you're up for going through your top 5 at each position, just quick hitting them?
Yeah, let's try it.
Or however many you want to go through, just kind of give a list of guys you like starting at quarterback.
Let's do it. All right. So we're going to do early and late.
We'll just do early. We've got 4 minutes until lock. So let's just quick hit early slate quarterbacks.
Matt Barkley 1, Case Keenum is 2. I don't think you need to go crazy from there. Honestly, I'm not playing a lot of other quarterbacks on the early slate. It's probably Ellinger and it's probably a Shane Buechele or a Sam Howell. Those are the 3, 4, and 5 guys, I guess. At running back, you should be focusing on same situations. Darrington Evans and Ebner are 1, 2. Carolina, Spencer Brown and Hubbard are 3, 4. Washington, Jarrett Patterson, Brian Robinson are 5, 6. You could probably flip them. Robinson 5, Patterson 6. Wide receiver, most of these, like you should probably, the top 5 are all Buffalo. You should play at least 1 or 2 of these guys. Those names are Hodgins, Kumaro, Gentry, Pau, and Shakir. If you're looking for GPP situations, which you should probably mix a little bit, the Bears are great for them. It's Coulter 1, Webster 2, Newsome would be number 3, and Tajay Sharp would be number 4. I think all the rest are dart throws. Tight end, it's really just 2 or 3 teams here. Jake Tongs would be number 1 for Chicago. You can also play Ryson and Chase Allen. Carolina, Tommy Tremble would be 2. Stephen Sullivan would be 3. And then Washington, Armani Rogers would be 4. And then I guess go back to one of the Chicago tight ends, Chase Allen, probably 5.
Okay. So we just covered all of them. That was really quick. You did we got to the question. I'm happy that we were able to do that for Gary right at the end there. Anything else that you want to say about this slate in general, either slate before we move on?
We can do it for Maine,
before
I guess,
we end the show.
Wants it.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Maine. I did not have early in front of me, but Maine I think is pretty easy. Quarterback 1, Perkins. 2, Skylar Thompson. 3, Ian Book. 4, Josh Johnson. That's more in order of upside. 5 for me would be Trask. Going to running back, it's going to be a lot of the same guys we talked about, but Rachaad White 1, Warren 2, Keyshawn Vaughn 3, Malik Davis 4, and then I think Mike Boone should be 5. At tight end, if you're playing DraftKings, play Driscoll. Don't consider anyone else. And then from there, I think you're looking at the 3 LA Chargers tight ends is 1, 2, 3. And from there, it's some combination of the Steelers guys. Hayward and Sternberger would be 4 and 5 for me. At wide receiver, again, the top 5 are all LA receivers, so play at least one of them. It's JJ Koski, Landon Akers, and Lance McCutcheon. A little more worried about Ben Skowronek and Tutu Atwell. Warren Jackson's questionable, but those are the top 5. Excluding them, I think Eric Ezukama deserves a look. Calvin Austin deserves a look for the Pittsburgh situation. And if you have situational questions, I think go ahead and ask them, but that's about it. Jalen Camp for Houston's pretty good in projections too. Yeah.
KC Chiefs 320 says, don't sleep on Jody Fortson. I suspect he might be a little bit biased, KC Chiefs there. But do you have any thoughts on Jody Fortson today? I guess we got 1 minute until lock of that.
He's a great receiving tight end. He was just hurt in camp. So I think he fell behind a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean he won't play today.
All right. So if you're finishing a lineup right now, feel free to throw Jody Fortson in there. He might be a dart throw that could play. All right. I think that does it for this show. Thank you guys for sticking around, listening to us. I know Matt does a great job. We saw D Fick take down the quarter arcade. I can't remember which one of you.
He took that. I think it's the 50-cent one, whatever they call it.
Yeah, took down the Minimax. He took down the Minimax, which is one of the hardest contests to win, even though the payout is not that great. It's a huge contest, so that was fun to see. You've been killing it, Matt. Thanks a lot once again for providing all of this information for us. You do a ton of research and you do a great job. Thanks, guys, for watching. Give us a like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our shows and offerings. And coming up next, we've got MMA Live Before Lock coming up in, I believe, 2 hours, and then MLB Live Before Lock later today as well. Thanks, guys, and good luck.